There is no collapse of the wave function in my theory. It's simply they are decision of free will of the fields. They want to know themselves because one wants to know itself. One creates fields which are parts whole of itself. And, like the cells of my body, the cell of your body are also parts whole of the organism because they contain the genome of the organism, of the egg that created the entire organism. The same genome of the egg is in every part of our body, 30 to 50 trillion cells. So this is incredible. A computer is not built this way. Computers, as the parts are transistors, they on off. They don't know anything about the entire system. There is an holographic principle here at work that is also reflected in the body itself. Never mind the spirit, the spiritual part, which is what connects us to the whole.
Federico Faggin is the inventor of the microprocessor and a key figure in Silicon Valley history. Today we discuss his book, Irreducible, and his theory of consciousness. Bernardo Kastrup calls Faggin, quote, probably the most well-rounded idealist alive. Chapters are located below. Please like and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. You are a Silicon Valley legend, the inventor of the microprocessor, and we're CEO of a couple tech companies as well. And we'll probably touch on your professional career a bit, but I actually want to jump right into what you would call the most significant moment of your life. Can you share with me and the audience what occurred December 1990?
Well, what occurred is that I had an extraordinary experience of consciousness that changed completely my idea of who I am in relationship to the universe, to reality. Of course, like anybody, in ordinary experience, we consider ourselves separate from each other. The universe is something that goes on whether we like it or not. So we're not, we have little to do with the universe. We simply are inside of it. And at that time, I was also not very happy about myself. And so I wanted to know about consciousness. I was quite intense about wanting to know why I was suffering when there was no reason to be suffering. And also, what is consciousness? And so in this climate, I was, during the vacations, the Christmas holidays vacation, I was skiing up in Tahoe with the family. So it was a relatively serene time for my life because, running a company is quite demanding. And it was the only vacation that I was taking a year, about 10 days around Christmas. So anyway, so in this climate, one night I wake up thirsty. So about midnight, I got out to the kitchen, got a glass of water, went back to bed. And while I was just waiting to go back to sleep, thinking nothing, out of my chest comes this unbelievable energy, and it is love. And it is love, but the incredible thing is that my consciousness is in this energy. So it is my love. So I am the source of love. And it was a love that was unconditional. It was directed to, it was just directed to everything. And it was mixed with joy and also with peace. And peace I never felt in my life. In fact, part of me was this restlessness that I didn't understand. And peace was, wow, this is me. I am that. In other words, I identify with this energy that feels like, 10,000 times the love that I ever felt before. And also, unconditional, never felt unconditional love before. And then this energy expands. It is a white scintillating light, by the way. So it is physical. It's not an imagination. It's clearly very different than any kind of imagination one could have. And then expands everywhere. And now I am in this energy everywhere. So I'm observing essentially myself, because the sense of me is this consciousness with which I identify myself. And so I am both the observer and the observed. In my mind, this thought emerges, and I recognize that this energy is the same energy that everything in the universe is made of. So this is what is the substance, the stuff of which everything is made. My body was hot. It was vibrating as if the cells of my body were, synchronous with the scintillation of in this light, and the sense of well-being was enormous. So that was the experience, and it was so contrary to what I thought I was, that for me that was a sea change. After that experience, I could no longer believe that I was separate, because the truth value of that experience was so powerful. And now I would say it was a direct experience of consciousness. In other words, because you experienced, you live that experience, and you know that it cannot be false, it cannot deceive you. That's the way it's got to be. But it's not an equation, it's not a theorem, it's something that you know, and that you also know that you want to find out. Within that energy, there is also the motivation to find out more about it, because whatever you experience could not exhaust who you are. So it's like an introduction to a sense of who you are that is simply an invitation to go deeper. And that was what happened. In fact, after that, my life changed.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing, Federico. And I have so many questions to ask you about that experience. I mean, was there it was completely unexpected, right? There was nothing that was leading up to it that could have given you a signal that this was coming.
The important thing is that I couldn't even potentially imagine that one could have such an experience. So it wasn't just, that I read somewhere that people could experience something like this. It was completely out of the blue, and in some way in response to my searching. I was searching. I wanted to know. So in some way, now I could say that without knowing, I had prayed, because I wanted to know, and not to do something about it, just to know, and just for the need to know. And so the universe responds when one is so intense about it.
Right. And did it feel like this experience, this vision, was it something that if someone else was in the room with you, would they have also seen this same thing? Or do you think that this was personal to something that only you could have seen?
I think only I could have seen, but I don't know. In fact, that thought didn't even occur to me, so because I was almost in a different environment, how could this physical energy come out of me and be white light scintillating, and my consciousness being there, and the consciousness everywhere. So it was just mind-boggling. In fact, it was one of the strongest aspects of this experience was being stunned, because it was so unbelievably unexpected that it was like, whoa, there was that sense of whoa, but at the same time, it was so captivating and so immersive as an experience that the like of that I never had before, and the intensity of it I never had before. So.
And have you had any experiences since then that were either similar to that or even in the neighborhood of that kind of experience?
I had many extraordinary experiences later that were in the neighborhood of that. They did not have the intensity of that, though they were not too far. But I think what they couldn't have is that after having this experience, in some sense, I already, I was, the surprise was already over. You can only be surprised once with this kind of experiences, right? The example, I had an experience where I was writing, and at one point I looked out of the window, and all of a sudden my consciousness is everywhere. It's in the trees. I was in my office. It was in the grass, in the buildings in front of me. I was everywhere. So that's my conscience was in everything that I could perceive. So similar to this one, but having had this experience before, then there was no longer the surprise in that sense. So it was also quite intense, quite unusual. Also, I experienced having a consciousness about one point of light at the base of my sternum. That was it. All of me was one point of light at the base of the sternum. How is that possible? Then I have experiences where I was out of body. So my consciousness was not even in the body, it was outside the body. Then I had an experience where there was a field of consciousness with stuff there, but there was nobody watching. So just think about it. You have this stuff where there is stuff, but it was like a memory. The only way that I could understand it was a memory when I was a few weeks old. Before there was an ego, before there was an observer. And this was the experience, the memory of what it was like to be a few weeks old, boy, infant. So, and that actually taught me a lot, because I could see that from this field of consciousness where everything was projected into this field of consciousness, my sensations, feelings that were in the body, the objects that were outside, the sounds, they were all in this thing, but they were not mine. They were just things, like if you can imagine observing something, but you're not the observer. That is so crazy, right? But then I could see that in time, my consciousness would arise by separating what the consciousness could control of the body and what was controlled by the environment, so that the separation between myself and the environment would appear from this sea of experience without observer. You see? So that's how that's how the formation of the ego, can start by, an environment where you basically, there is an experience, but there is no observer.
Did these other experiences, so not the initial one, but the subsequent ones, were they brought on by any practices that you were doing? Like, were you doing anything?
Typically meditation, or special practices, dialogues, special dialogues. I tried, after that experience, I tried several ways of understanding, and also of introspection and personal investigation, or so through all those methods, different methods, holotropic breath work. I had many extraordinary experiences of consciousness that reveal many other aspects of consciousness, which of course were essential for me to understand the nature of consciousness and be able to then bring together physics and metaphysics, physics and spirituality.
Sure. And were there one or two that seemed to be particularly effective, would you say?
Well, for example, one that was funny was that I remember when I learned how to walk. And what was funny was that the legs were taking me. The legs were not mine. My consciousness was not yet in my legs. And that is, together with the first thing that I said earlier, that there was a field without observer, the legs were taking me, and I was giggling because they were taking me, kind of autonomously, and I was going with it.
Wow, that's cool.
And little by little, I gained, I could understand a little by little. Then I had gained consciousness of my leg, that those legs were mine, that I could control them, you see.
Right. Yeah. It came on later. Wow. That's so cool.
They-
Okay. I could ask you many questions about these experiences and things that you've seen and everything like that. But I do, and we'll probably interlace that on the rest of the conversation. But I do want to talk about your book, Irreducible, and recommend it for folks to pick up. And it's linked in the description for people who want to pick up the book. And and this entails your theory of consciousness. And would you mind sharing with the audience? I know, keep a simple summary at first, and then I'm going to dive in and ask you lots of specific questions about it.
Okay. Well, the after this awakening experience, which I call awakening experience, I started exploring consciousness, and it took me about 20 years before, through all kinds of other experiences, of which few I just mentioned earlier, to get a sense of what consciousness is, because I didn't know. I mean, it was, for me, it was all new. I never had, consciousness was not something that I was thinking. I was thinking about making microprocessors or at those time, making neural networks and things of that sort. So it was completely different attention that I had from intellectually. So after about 20 years, I realized that consciousness had to be fundamental. I could not explain it in any way with something that does not have consciousness. So matter, for example, without consciousness cannot create consciousness. Not only that, but also free will had to go together with consciousness, because consciousness without free will doesn't make any sense. Because, what good does it do to you to know, to have an intention, to want to do something, and then you cannot do what you want? So, there has to be maybe a limited amount, but some free will must be together with consciousness. And of course, free will without consciousness it makes even less sense, because free will implies that you know what you want. Otherwise it's simply random activity or something that is basically driven by the brain as an instrument, or as a informational structure, and that's it. So, which is, by the way, this is the way scientism, I call it scientism because it's not science with a capital S, but it is a sort of a dogmatic way to look at reality, starting with materialism, and eliminating from the very beginning consciousness and free will as possibilities. That, a scientist is what is telling us today. They're telling us that we are machines. When the body dies, there is nothing left of us, and on it goes. So that kind of idea, worldview that comes from science perverted into scientism, that kind of idea is what now dominates our worldview, and it could not be more false than that, given the experiences that I had. It was not possible. But at the same time, consciousness and free will could not be explained within the scientific paradigm of today. And so I decided that consciousness and free will had to be, from the very beginning of the universe, they had to be property of all that exists. All that exists now, I call it one, but simply to distinguish to the universe, the physical universe that is not supposed to have any consciousness and free will. In the very beginning. So after this conviction, but it was a conviction that needed to be studied. It was like an hypothesis that made sense. I wanted to see if I could join quantum physics and consciousness, because it was very clear that the properties of consciousness are not explainable with the properties of computers, for example, or of machines, which are classical machines, the machines that exist in space and time, the machines that we make. That life had to be foundational for consciousness to be able to exist and interact with this reality. I wasn't clear if, at that time, the body itself, the physical body itself, is conscious, or if consciousness exist in a deeper reality. So I wanted to investigate that, and I decided to basically leave everything that I was doing. I sold my last company. I got out of all the boards that I was in, and decided to dedicate myself to this endeavor. In 2011, I started a foundation with my wife, the Federico Faggin Foundation, to study consciousness, to promote the study of consciousness at various universities and so on. And so that became what I call my fourth life. and it took another 10 years before arriving at a theory of consciousness in which I realized, together with a sorry,
it's okay. I can edit that out. Oh, no problem. I can edit that. That's fine.
Yeah. So I decided to start this new direction, and also with a collaborator, a physicist, which is one of the arguably a top 10 physicists in the world in the field of quantum information. We came out with a theory of consciousness that explains it as the property of quantum fields. Properties of quantum fields that, of course, physicists do not recognize now, but they must be, because the consciousness and free will can actually explain why the quantum fields have to have those crazy properties that they have. And those are the crazy properties of the fields. Number one, the state of the field, which is the fundamental starting point for quantum physics. You describe a state of the field as a vector in n dimensions, but this vector exists in an n-dimensional space where the dimensions of this space, n dimensions, are complex numbers. They're not real numbers. So it's a very, in a sense, crazy space, because a complex number describes waves. It does not describe numbers. That's what complex numbers do, because they have the imaginary part and the real part. And I don't want to go through a lecture of mathematics and physics, but
it's okay. You could if you wanted.
Yeah, let's take it for good, right? So basically, this space is a space of probabilities, and the interesting thing is that this vector, the characteristic of this vector, cannot be copied. So you cannot make another field with this. You cannot reproduce, clone, call it whatever you want, but reproduce this field. It is an intrinsic property of the field, and it can only be, if it can be known, it can only be known by the field itself. It cannot be known from the outside, because there is another theorem, quantum physics, is the Leibniz theorem, that says that if you make a measurement, the maximum thing that you can know of that field is 1 bit per quantum bit. And the quantum bits represent a potentially infinite number of states. Exactly, you can imagine the possible states as directions in 3D space. So every point on the surface of a sphere is one of the possible states of a quantum bit, where the classical bit is 0 or 1. So when you make a measurement, for example, you can only know 0 or 1 of a quantum bit, where the quantum bit would be in infinity of possibilities. You can know, no matter in which way you measure it, in which direction you measure it, you will always find 0 or 1 with certain probabilities. You cannot even know if it is 0. The 0 or 1, the theory gives you only the probability that you will measure 0 or 1. It cannot even tell you if you will measure 0 or 1. Only the probability of measuring 0 or measuring 1. So this is the crazy property that people don't understand, because in classical physics, you measure the direction of a motion of an object, for example. You can measure velocity and position at the same time. You cannot do that in quantum physics. So the second thing of a field is that when the field manifests itself in space and time, creates an excited state of itself, what it does, that excited state, it represents only one of the possible states in which it could manifest itself, of which you can only know mathematically the probability. So you can only know the probability of the state, but not the actual state. And this is called the collapse of the wave function. And the collapse of the wave function is supposed to be random. There is no law that can tell you which way is going to show up, other than the probability with which that state might show up. So if the field is conscious, then it is obvious that we can interpret this collapse of the wave function as a decision of free will of the field which is observed. So the field that you're observing is the field that decides what to show up, not a random event from the outside. Since you don't know what decision is the field is taken, it looks like a random event from you, non-algorithmic event from you. But from the field that has made the decision, that is a decision of free will. So now this theory can actually explain why quantum physics has to derive directly from the fact that the universe is conscious to start with. So if you start with a conscious universe, you have to have quantum physics. And then in order for the quantum fields to communicate with each other, since they cannot communicate their state cannot be copied, cannot be reproduced, they must use classical symbols to communicate with each other. And that's exactly why, therefore, there has to be also a classical world, which is the world that describes the symbols with which the field communicates with the other fields. So the particles what we call particles are in fact symbols that the field used to communicate with each other.
Right. And the ultimate, so it sounds like I guess this is a idea from the book and also from some things you've said in interviews, that the one or everything wants to know itself.
Yeah. Therefore, if you want to make a theory, the theory has to be, correct from the formal point of view. Then you have to start with the postulate. And the postulate, I call it the postulate of being, is the following: one is the totality of what exists. One is dynamic and holistic. And in saying this, I have simply said what quantum physics is saying. The world is dynamic, the universe is dynamic, in the sense that it's never the same instant after instant. It always changes. And two is holistic, meaning everything is interconnected within the universe. The universe is not made of separable parts. This is what quantum physics is saying. I'm adding one more covenant, which is one, dynamic and holistic, wants to know itself. Why do I do that? Because the deepest desire that we have is to know ourselves, is to know why are we here, what are we here for what, and so on, right? So if we are expressions of one, expression of the deepest universe, we have all the aspects of one, which are the body, the mind, and the spirit. Then the body is the physical reality, the mind is the quantum reality, and the spirit is the meaning of information, which is described by the mental, the quantum reality. The quantum reality, therefore, is simply describes the mind of the universe. The classical physics describes the body of the universe, and the spirit describes the meaning of the universe, which is the meaning of qualia. And qualia are the sensations and feelings that are represented in quantum physics by the quantum state of the field. So we are a field that controls a body, like the body is like a drone that observes the world, the classical world, transform the information in the classical world into symbols, special symbols, like call it live symbols, live information, because they are a mixture of quantum and classical. Those are the symbols that then the field interprets as this physical reality, and experiences them as qualia, as sensations and feelings. And from the sensations and feeling, we extract the meaning. The meaning is the essence of our experience. In other words, if I feel love for a person, the feeling, the qualia, is the love that I feel, which is wonderful, great, powerful. But I want to understand what it means. Why do I love that person? What is it that I love that person? So there is a meaning embedded into qualia, and that meaning is the deeper aspect of reality. And when I communicate with symbols, I communicate the meaning. I want to communicate the meaning, because qualia, I cannot communicate the qualia. The qualia are very personal. My experience cannot be shared, but I try to share the meaning of that experience, and using symbols which are shareable. I also need, by the way, to use symbols to memorize the experience, because the experience the quantum state in a field only lasts a very short period of time, and it keeps on changing. So everything, the experience can only happen in that very short period of time, which is the present. And so when I put into memory my experience, I simply put symbolic. I put the experience that I'm having in the present is put into symbol, and it builds the past. It builds the past out of memory. But that past can only be read and experienced in the present. So there is no past. There is only the present, because in the past, which was created in the present, in that past, there are only symbols. They're not in time. They're symbols.
Yeah. It's interesting. Okay. That's very interesting. I like that. Okay, so there's so many questions I have to ask you, specifics about your theory here, but
wait,
that would be helpful.
Wait. I should have taken out also the phone. Always disturbing. Okay.
I know, it's the modern world, right? It's just so I think it'd be helpful. I actually discovered your work through Donald Hoffman a few years ago. I was interviewing him, specifically my second time interviewing him on his paper about fusions of consciousness. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this theory or familiar with his model, but he mentioned you in that interview, and then I started to go down the rabbit hole of your work, and actually seems to have a lot of overlap with your theory. This idea of on yours, the terminologies, these consciousness units that come together to form Seities. And his model, it seems like there's a ton of overlap. I don't know. Are you familiar with that in particular, or Hoffman's work in general? And I was wondering, it might be helpful because a lot of my audience follows his work intensely. How does your theory align or diverge from his?
Well, it is aligned and divergent, because we worked together, for about 5 years. I financed, with the foundation, I financed a small group that he had at UC Irvine for about 5 years. So, but for some reason, he did not agree with me that consciousness had to be quantum. So he kind of was trying to, his model of consciousness is classical. And so that I always found that could not account for the properties of consciousness, the privacy of consciousness. You can copy the data in the program of a computer, for example, but you cannot copy the state of a field, not the state of even a quantum computer, which is not a field. It's just a small human construction that behaves quantumly for some time, where the field is completely quantum and it doesn't even exist in space and time. So it did not want to go there, and so we decided, okay, well, this such a fundamental divergence here that we couldn't really, I couldn't contribute to his ideas nor him to mine, because we part the company basically. But we are good friends. I mean, it's not a it was not a bad thing. It's simply that he just didn't see that at that time. I don't know if now he has changed his idea about it, but now with, at that point, I was also brought into the group, Professor Dariano, which is the scientist with which I came up with this theory. But the basic theory was already there, but Dariano, being much more knowledgeable of quantum information, which is something that I never studied at school because I'm much older. At that time, the quantum information did not even exist when I studied physics. And Dariano basically saw those two theorems, the non-cloning theorem and the Olivos theorem, that they could actually explain what I was talking about. And so he really brought to bear that knowledge that allowed me to also have a deep connection with quantum field theory, which otherwise it would be more philosophical, but in this way it became science as well as philosophy. So anyway, Don and I agree completely. I had the same idea back in the before I met him, that there had to be some conscious units that were interacting and so on and so forth. But those conscious units had to be quantum, and that from the very beginning for me, that they had to have those properties that classical systems don't have.
Yeah, that's interesting because I thought so, and I haven't read much of his research in like the past year or so, but when we talked about the fusions paper, it sounded like the consciousness units, these individual units of consciousness, actually lived outside of space and time, and they were like projected through multiple layers to eventually emerge and create space and time. So
yeah, that is later. Yeah. Not when we were working together. That was later.
Yeah,
because he came up at that time. He was thinking, he was following the work of a physicist that was trying to develop a physics without space and time, and so he was captivated by that, and so it was at that time where he went his way.
Gotcha. Yeah.
In my way, the space and time is also, I've always considered space and time more part of the illusion created by the body observing a reality that we don't know what it is, which is what Don Hoffman has been saying also. Don has been very articulating that very well, showing that the world, we do not know what's out there, and so we create something which is in great measure a projection, a construction of the sensory brain system, to which we give meaning through consciousness, but the nature of consciousness and also the nature of free will, are fundamental, and so. For me, that was that could not be the power of this theory is that if you start with a postulate that consciousness and free will exist, then you can explain quantum physics, and you can explain what physicists have been struggling for 100 years to explain: the superposition, the entanglement, all these properties that otherwise you cannot understand, and the collapse of the wave function. Why do you need, what is the collapse of the wave? What does it do? There is no collapse of the wave function in my theory. It's simply the decision of free will of the fields. They want to know themselves, because one wants to know itself. One creates fields which are parts whole of itself. And, like the cells of my body, the cell of your body are also parts whole of the organism, because they contain the genome of the organism, of the egg that created the entire organism. The same genome of the egg is in every part of our body, 30 to 50 trillion cells. So this is incredible. A computer is not built this way. Computers, as the parts are transistors, they on off. They don't know anything about the entire system. So you see the holographic. There is an holographic principle here at work that is also reflected in the body itself. Never mind the spirit, the spiritual part, which is what connects us to the whole.
Yeah, I'd love to ask a question too. So sort of zooming out a bit here, and maybe the answer is we just can't know or don't know and can't understand. But perhaps you have an idea around this that I can accept that the one wants to know itself, and the idea it's an ancient idea, know thyself. It goes back to the Greeks, right? And so there's a long history, and I can understand that intuitively as well as just a human being wanting to know myself well. But I wonder if I think about it in terms of the strategy of the consciousness units in trying to know themselves, that with the world as it is, the universe, let's say, just this universe that we're experiencing right now, it's so massive, it's so big, there's almost 8 billion people on the planet. It would seem like if whenever this thing got kicked off, whenever this thing started, that in order to know thyself most effectively, it would have been better to just stay small. If that makes any sense. It would have been better to just kind of remain tiny and try to know oneself at a smaller scale. And now it's just like this whole thing has gotten too big to understand.
Well, but in my sense is that, if we are a part whole, meaning that we contain within ourselves, but within ourselves doesn't mean the body. Within ourselves, the field has no boundaries. The field is everywhere. So who we are is a field. It's not a physical structure. We are not the body. So who we are, okay, containing the essence of one within ourselves, we cannot be happy to know ourselves as a little thing. We have to know ourselves as vast as one, and know the others as vast as one, because we are, for me to know myself, I need to know you with my point of view, and you need to know me with your point of view. And so, because I am part of you and you are part of me. So this changes completely the perspective. It's a much, much deeper perspective. It's not just, we're not little things. Yes, while we are living in this body, in this planet, we in fact, we're not living in the body. We control the body. Though the body is not separate from us. Why? Because the states of the fields in quantum physics are not separate from the fields. The particles are excited states of the field, just like a wave in a sea. The wave of the sea is not separate from the sea. You see it, on the surface, it moves, it can appear, disappear. The same a particle. The particle is a state of the field that appears, disappear, and therefore cannot be an object separate from the field. That's one of the major achievements of quantum field theory, to recognize that the particles, which are the foundation of physics, are not separate from the fields. The ontological units of existence are the fields, not the particles. And in my theory, the same thing. We are fields that are combined. Fields in my theory combine into fields of higher degrees of higher hierarchy, and so that's certainly is going on. But we're still fields, so we are parts whole.
And so the model is called Quantum Information-based Panpsychism, QIP.
Yeah.
Can you explain, and I guess referring back to what I was talking about before, what is the creation story for QIP? Like, how does the system start up?
Well, whether there is a beginning or not, that remains to be seen, right? In other words, beginning is only for linear minds that are looking for something that is starts and stops, right? But that's, so but to explain, we need the beginning. So the beginning. Excuse me, just a second. Let me here. I was muted. Sorry. So repeat the question because I.
Oh, sure, no problem. Yeah. So, what is the creation story for QIP?
So for QIP, if we wanted to start with the beginning, which of course we need to simply, because we otherwise cannot start. we cannot start at minus infinity, but so we would start with one awaking itself to its own existence. So what does it mean? It means that before anything, there must be the potentiality of existence, because one, the universe could not come from nothing, right? I mean, how can you get something from nothing? But there must be a field that no one can know, including one, which are called the potentiality of one. And one awakes to itself. That is the beginning of consciousness. When one awakes to itself, it sees itself existing, creates consciousness, and creates its self-awareness. And so in this movement, one also creates a part of itself, which is the part that he has known, that becomes a unit of consciousness. So the unit. So to know is to know yourself at the level of one is to create what you know. You bring it from the potential existence into actual existence. And the next time that one knows itself, he knows itself within the next point of view. And so the next point of view is a new unit of consciousness, because he knows itself in a different direction in which he knew itself before. And because one is holistic, it cannot know itself as a piece. It must know itself completely in that direction in which it knows itself. So the direction in which one knows itself is what I call the identity of the field. The identity of the field is determined by the direction in which one knows itself. And so that gives a kind of a, the beginning of a model, or the beginning of a narrative to understand how the consciousness units, or if you want to call it monads, a la Leibniz, call them monads because they are the idea, the scientist, philosopher, engineer, mathematician, incredible man that had this idea first that I know of is actually Leibniz.
I wanted to ask you. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you dive into Leibniz a bit, and that's because the monad idea, it seems to heavily influence your theory. Can you tell the audience and myself about, I guess, his work, how he stands out to you, and I guess, when did you first come upon his idea of monads, and how does it influence your work?
Well, after I came up with the idea of consciousness unit, I found out, because I didn't study philosophy, but I then found out that, sort of backtrack. So my ideas came by recognizing what, in my own experiences, recognizing realities that before I had never thought about it. And then when I started thinking about it, and I pick up books or whatever, then I would find that other people had thought similar ideas than I had thought, simply because, they had done something similar before I did. But my ideas did not come from reading books. My ideas came primarily from experiencing myself, and experiencing, experiences, different dimensions of myself and so on. And knowing that also within myself there are possibly, many sub-selves that are interacting, which I am a part, a higher level of reality. So Leibniz, the monadology that I read many years ago, basically, started from the idea that the atoms of reality could not be, Democritus atoms. They could not be the atoms of physics, the atoms that Newton, in a sense, used to in his physics. It was very much, Leibniz was a counterpoint to Newton because he felt that the atoms of reality had to contain not only the exteriority but also the interiority. The fact that we are conscious, the fact that we have free will, the fact that we are beings that go beyond matter, where Newton basically was studying matter, but matter could not possibly create the other capacities that we have, and so Newton wanted to see that in fact, now we could say that Newton was a precursor of the fractal nature of reality, because even the smallest part must have all the property of the totality of the whole, you see, and so there must be levels of evolution that from the very small to the very large contain the same structure, the same essence. So of course, when Leibniz was, developed his theory, quantum physics did not exist. So Leibniz could not really find any connection with science. And of course, also science was just beginning. But so it was a highly metaphysical, philosophical point of view. But what I propose, on the other hand, is really based on physics, but saying, hey, the quantum fields that you start with must have consciousness and free will to start, not later, from the beginning. So if you start there, then you can actually understand why there has to be quantum physics and there has to be classical physics. So it's a much more evidence-based theory than Leibniz, because there was no evidence of quantum fields at that time.
I'd love to hear too about how a thinker, a legend as well, and still with us, but Roger Penrose. So he has theories about quantum microtubules and his orchestrated objective reduction, Orch-OR theory. So he thinks consciousness originates at the quantum level as well. How does that compare, contrast with your theory?
Well, Penrose essentially is looking at consciousness as a phenomenon that arises in matter, and that's completely different than my point of view. My point of view is matter is a phenomenon that arises in consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental, is primary. You have to start there. It's a big difference. So in some way, Penrose is not abandoned materialism. He's simply finding the mechanism for consciousness. The mechanism for consciousness, something happens in quantum that happens in the microtubules. But nobody can tell us, why do we have quantum? Why do we have to have quantum? Why is there a quantum reality? You see?
It doesn't explain the quantum, but yours finds the links between.
I explain the quantum by studying with consciousness. Mm-hmm. But by studying with consciousness, I start with a postulate which is self-evident, because you know that you are conscious. It's a big difference.
That's what I know the most. That's actually the thing that is least controversial.
We are all conscious. So how can we debate? See, the problem is that physics, since physics started to try to explain matter, their success had gotten to the point where they think that with matter they can explain everything. No, you cannot explain something like consciousness, because matter does not have consciousness, and consciousness is not a property of matter. or free will. How can you explain free will with something that doesn't have free will? It doesn't make any sense. And consciousness and free will are really wedded to each other, because it's almost like, they're not separable. You see, we always have also in science and in mathematics, we separate things. A set is a set defined by the elements that are part of the set, and the elements are either in the set or out of the set. So discrete, reductionist, and you start there. But when everything is interconnected, you cannot separate two things. For example, consciousness and free will, they cannot be separated.
It's like trying to separate a field.
For example, even the simplest thing, like take the light that comes out of white light separated by prism. So you have the various colors of the rainbow. So take the red and take the orange. Is there a clear boundary between red and orange? Is there? No. That is, at most, there is a region where there is either is both red and orange, or neither, whatever you want to call it, but it's not orange, it's not red. And Gödel has actually shown that even in mathematics that is present, because there are statements that you can make based on a axiomatic mathematical system, sufficiently complex, like arithmetic, for example. You can make statements that cannot be proven to be right, or to be true, or to be false. So even mathematics has these conditions. Then logic itself cannot discriminate, all possible true and false. There are stuff that is true and false, or neither true nor false.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about Gödel's incompleteness theorem. We actually, in our call a few weeks ago, we chatted briefly, and you said that there was a tremendous relationship between your theory and his. And I mean, for folks who aren't aware of it in the audience, and I learned this through Gödel Escher Bach, the Douglas Hofstadter book from 1980 or so. I'm not sure if you ever read
70,
it, but phenomenal.
78 probably, yeah. It was
78,
actually
78, late.
That book was one of the awakening book for me. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh wow,
yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
I did an explainer on my channel about that book specifically, and thinking about, and the way he's able to explain it through, well, it's primarily about the math, but then to go through Bach's music, and then Escher's paintings, it elucidates it through these three different, say, frameworks, and the paradox of self-reference, and this like black hole you get into. I think that is this. Well, you talk about know thyself. You end up going infinitely with no end, to a point where you're just going inward and inward and inward, but there's no end.
Yeah,
there's no end to it, right?
Yeah, but basically the energy which everything is made is self-reflective. It's exactly this self-reflection that we're talking about. Is self-reflecting. That's what conscious is. It can know itself in a self-reflection. And so this is feedback, right? I mean, basically, it knows itself by self-reflecting. And so the capacity to do that is something that you have to start with as a foundational capacity of reality, or the reality, the most basic reality there is. You cannot make it up with something that doesn't have this property. It's the property of energy, of the stuff of which everything is made.
I'd love to ask you it's a more technical question about your theory, but Hilbert space comes up a lot in the book and is integral to your thought here. Can you tell us what's so special about Hilbert space, and why is it necessary for this theory?
Well, Hilbert space is a space that has n dimension, where n could be infinite, so it could be an infinite dimensional space, and therefore you can define vectors in this Hilbert space, And these vectors have n components. So n components are numbers, but the numbers of Hilbert space, of complex Hilbert space, because there is also non-complex Hilbert space, real Hilbert space, but the complex Hilbert space, which is the one used in quantum physics, those numbers are complex number. They are made of a real part and an imaginary part. As you know, the imaginary part has the square root of -1, which is called I for imaginary, and -1 cannot be achieved by multiplying two real numbers. You multiply two real numbers, whether they are positive or negative, the same number multiplied by itself, can never give you, whether they're positive or negative, a -1. That's why the square root of -1 is not a real number. And it is an imaginary number that behaves in a strange way. It not being a number, you can deal with it operationally like if it were a number, but in fact it can represent a wave, and is used in when you study electricity, magnetism, electromagnetic theories, and so on. Waves. When you study waves, you have to use complex numbers because they have exactly the properties of waves. They are not. They are numbers that don't represent just a point. They represent a wave. So they represent many points, and that's, which is not a number. A number represents only one quantity, not a complex number. And in quantum physics, these vectors represent probability amplitudes. Probability amplitude is a component of a probability, because if you multiply a probability amplitude, which is a complex number, but its complex conjugate, you obtain a probability. Okay? But now we get into mathematics, and most people probably, will need at least a piece of paper to, and a preliminary lecture for that. But the important point is that those vectors are not vectors that define what will happen. They are vectors that define the probability of what might happen. And therefore, when you describe the probability of what might happen, you're not describing what happens. Classical physics describes what will happen, the trajectory of a body. The body, instant after instant, occupies a point in space with a certain position and velocity, but not objects, quantum objects. Quantum objects don't even exist in space and time until you measure them. You see? So they don't exist in space and time. A particle doesn't exist in space and time. When you measure it, it shows up. And how does it show up? It shows up in the instrument that as a phenomenon which is not clear what happens, but that phenomenon gets amplified in the instrument, and it becomes a classical information that you and I can see. A light that goes on or off, or a dial that moves, or whatever it is something that is shareable information, because the actual information of the object, of the quantum object, cannot be known. You can only know a bit per quantum bit. That's what I was saying earlier. That's quantum physics. So when you make a measurement of the spin of an electron, for example, which is the direction in which the direction rotates, it's a sort of is a very special property of and the spin is a very property of particles, and this directional rotation is the state of a quantum bit, for example. And when you make a measurement, if you don't know the direction and you measure it in this direction, you make the measurement, you will force the quantum bit to move in that direction, and you will measure 1 or 0. In other words, it is in the same direction in which I measure, or in the opposite direction. That's all you can know. But you already have changed the state that it was. So you have destroyed the state that it was, and what you measure is 0 or 1 of something that you impose to the quantum bit. This is what happens. Because quantum objects, quantum states are not objects, and you cannot measure them without disturbing them. That's a fundamental property of quantum physics. So you cannot know the state, because to know the state, you must interact, and by interacting, you disturb, and the disturbance is foundational. So the idea that you can be an object of a reality that exists as, without, that you don't interfere with, like if you watch a movie, that is not true at the deepest level of reality. At the deepest level of reality, the fields are observers, observed, and agents, all three of them. And as they interact as all three of them. So there is feedback. In other words, there is continuously feedback because everything is interconnected. You cannot do something in feed forward only. You always have also feedback.
And you're talking about information quite a bit in the book. You describe something called a mutual information. And I imagine this is what's shared across the Seities. But it'd be great if you could tell us more about that. Yeah, could you explain mutual information?
Basically, the idea is that how do you get from two Seities to create a Seitie of higher level, of a higher degree, of a higher, for example,
if we may, I just used the term Seitie for the first time in this conversation. It might be helpful to even define what a Seitie is.
Seitie is just the name of a quantum field that is conscious and has free will. The quantum field by itself is just it doesn't have consciousness and free will. So to distinguish a quantum field described by quantum physics, from the one described by this theory, I use the word Seitie for a quantum field that has consciousness and free will on top of it. Okay, so when two quantum fields, two Seities interact with each other, why would they interact? To know each other. So the reason for any interaction is to communicate meaning with each other in order to know themselves. So as these two entities communicate with each other, they bring into resonance, let's call it, just to give you an idea, into resonance some portions of their field. So some portion of their fields are actually, because they succeed to understand each other. To understand each other means to have the same meaning in both Seities, in both fields. So when after these entities achieve the maximum common meaning that they could get by communicating with each other, at that point, out of themselves, you emerge a new field which combine the two into a higher level Seitie. Okay, for example, just like if the field of electrons and the field of protons interacting with each other find within themselves enough resonance which creates the field of hydrogen. The field of hydrogen, which is the combination of the two, which also has a completely different symbol that is more than the sum of the parts. Because the symbol hydrogen, which is simply if you view it mechanically, is the combination of an electron and a proton, has properties which are not the sums of the properties of the proton and the electron. It's the atom of hydrogen has much more sophisticated properties and impossible to derive by knowing the properties of the electron and the proton. And so that's how you can imagine creating fields of fields. In other words, creating Seities of higher order. And of course, this hierarchical level, we see it clearly. I don't know how many hierarchical levels we are, but hundreds of hierarchical levels over the level of the of the atoms, that form our body. The simplest cell, which is a bacterium, has 10 to the 10 atoms. 10 to the 10 billion atoms that interact quantumly and classically with laws that we have still had to figure out, because in a cell, the interactions are unbelievably complicated. So, and that's just one bacterium. The cells of our body are actually much more complex. They are enucleated cells. They have 10 to the 14 typically atoms. So they are 10,000 times more complex than another bacterium. The mitochondria, like bacteria, inside our cells, they are the little batteries that they create high energy electrons. But those we have structures within our body which are unbelievable, and where an electron, for example, is at the same time is matter, is energy, and is information. And because it's an elementary particle, you cannot separate those three functions. Depending on the situation, it behaves like matter, like energy, or like information. Where in a computer, those three aspects are completely separated, because the computer is reductionist. Is made the power supply is the energy. The information is the program, and the hardware is the matter. So the hardware, the software, and the power supply are the three components of a computer. And in our cells, all those three properties that you can see separate, they are all roll into one, inseparable, one from the other. And so the electron, the proton, behave as matter, to construct other atoms and molecules, or energy to energize interactions, or information. By being there, by being a certain way where they are, they carry information. So all those three things are in the same indivisible thing. That's why I call that information live information. It's not the quantum information nor the classical information. It's something in between. That is the only way that you can explain how cell works. The cell works using all those three properties in ways that we have yet to figure out.
Right.
Yes.
Something that we haven't touched on yet, but I imagine your theory would have something to say about. What does your theory have to say about entropy?
Well, entropy is sometimes an abused word, because entropy is defined for a closed system. And life is far from a closed system. Life itself, for example, interacts continuously with the outer world. In fact, the atoms and molecules of a cell, hours later or a day later, they are not the one that were there before. They are all, they are renewed, they're changed. So, I mean, talk about, the concept of entropy is really can be confusing. In a closed system, well, then entropy has a certain well-defined properties, and that are related to the amount of order or disorder of the system. So the more disorderly is the system, the more entropy there is. But in a living system, I prefer not to even talk about entropy, frankly, because it's a concept that is not well defined for a living system.
Interesting. I want to turn to Bernardo Kastrup. I spoke with him a few months ago. He's written many books, but the two books we covered in our discussion were on the metaphysics of Carl Jung, and one was on the metaphysics of Schopenhauer. And sort of a summary that he had was of the two books. I'm actually not sure which one this leans more on, but he said we are metacognitive spies for God, which is kind of interesting. I think which I thought was a beautiful quote. And I think it's really interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah, he wrote great. For your book, he wrote that you are probably the most well-rounded idealist alive, which coming from Kastrup is quite the comment. How do you? I guess and you've spoken with him too. I know you've done interviews with him. I've listened to a few of them. How do you? Where do you two align, and where would you two diverge?
Well, we align on the primacy of consciousness. We are truly, from that point of view, we are completely aligned. However, he has some difficulty with the idea that there could be individualization of consciousness. In other words, that you could have Seities, for example, that would be separate from, but in my model, they're not separate. They are really parts whole. So there is the concept of part whole, which is a little needs to be meditated upon, because, but you can see it if you consider just the cells of our body. The cells of our body had the exact same genome of the egg that created the entire organism. So each cell has the potential knowledge of the organism. That's why a cell later on in life can express aspects of the whole organism that were not when the cell was born. You see, and that's what, that's, a transistor, once it's built, is the transistor. It works or it doesn't work, but you cannot change function. You cannot change, while it's, it's part of the system, you cannot change it. So, you can see how a computer and a living organism are completely different machines. And you hear people say, "Oh, well, we are like like a biological computer." I mean, this is pure ignorance of people that don't even know what they're talking about, because a cell is a unbelievable. I mean, you cannot do a simulation of a cell because it's a quantum and classical system that interacts with the world. So you have to interact with the environment. You cannot. It doesn't make sense in isolation because it's not meant to be in isolation. You see, this thing we just don't want to deal with that because it's too complicated. So we want to simplify. But if you simplify, you remove the very essence of what you're trying to study. You study that. How do we study life? By killing it first, right? Well, are you studying life? No, you're studying a kill thing, a dead thing. So going back to Bernardo, so Bernardo has a very good metaphysics, but then it's not connected to quantum physics. So, the fundamental difference between his theory and my theory is that through these two theorems, I connect aspects of consciousness and free will to what actually happens in the physical reality, and in a way that explains why that must be, and that gives a lot more strength and a lot more credibility and plausibility. You see, and but it is clear that we are, like he says, we are aspects of one through which one knows itself. Because our self-knowing is the knowing of one, because we are all interconnected. One is what connects every one of us from the inside, in the meaning aspect of it. See, the spiritual aspect is the meaning aspect. The quantum aspect, the qualia, is the mental aspect, and the classical physics, the particles, as classical particles and so on, that is the body aspect, the physical aspect. So body, mind, and spirit are represented, this triad, these three interconnected aspects that cannot be separated, because the experience must be also stored. How do you store the experience? You need matter to store experience. So that's the purpose of matter, is to store experience and also to have symbols to communicate the experience. And the mind, what is the mind? The mind is the ability to actually imagine possibilities before you make them real. So that's why in the mind they can be in superposition, but when they are real, they cannot be in superposition. Is one of the possibilities must be realized, and so.
Right. I want to ask you about the symbols, and well, not just, I guess, how we experience the world or why this feels this way, things look the way they do. Also, their archetypes, their symbols throughout history that resonate with people. Have you noticed, I guess, patterns with the symbols? Like, I used to use the term archetype. I guess I'm showing you my hand, revealing my hand a bit here, that I'm, I guess, sort of referencing Carl Jung a bit. But are there like primordial patterns that you've come across, that you've discovered?
Well, the primordial aspects like love, like joy, like peace, like curiosity, those primordial. That's the need, the desire to know, the will. So I mean, all those are primordial aspects that then manifest in different ways on different people, on different entities. So, and in different in different ways that they are connected, but they are all interconnected. So, but the archetypes, the way Jung intends them, it's not been the kind of filter through which I've seen things. So, but also because I've been much more concerned with the foundational theory than the psychological aspects of the theory. So that comes later. But right now I'm still getting the foundational understanding. And next step will be to actually support it or falsify it through experiments. So because I'm doing science, I'm not doing philosophy here, I'm not doing metaphysics, I'm doing science. And so this theory must be proven like any other theory. And it can be proven because it's well formed. And so you can do it.
What can you tell us? What are some of the experiments that you have planned or you'd like to run?
Well, the most important experiment that I'm planning, the details are, I don't want to, it's too early to talk about them, but is to prove that plants have consciousness. We already know that plants have intelligent behaviors. So there is enough evidence to show that is going on. But are they conscious? Because you can say, you could say, well, a computer has intelligent behavior too, but is it conscious? In that case, no. So the fact that the plants are, have intelligent behavior wouldn't necessarily imply that they're conscious. So, but if we can find, we can show that the plants have consciousness, and that consciousness is a quantum phenomenon that exists within plants. So then one experiment can actually disprove all the theories that says that consciousness is a property of the brain, because the plants don't have any brain. So just one experiment can falsify 80% of the theories of consciousness that people have presented, because all the ones that require a brain as a seat of consciousness. And of course there is already evidence that in the near-death experiences, for example, that one can be conscious and have very powerful experiences when the brain is not working, and when the body is really clinically dead, if not temporarily dead. and then they have experiences that are life-changing. So, how can you have, a life-changing, most important experience, not life-changing because you were dead, but life-changing because
death-changing.
you actually understood aspect of yourself that you couldn't even understand when your brain was functioning perfectly. So, how can you do that, right? And the brain is not working. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Yeah, I did about a month ago, an explainer video about near-death experiences.
Yeah.
So I delved into the science behind that, and yeah, it's incredible. So Plant Experiment. I can't wait to see other experiments that are going to come out of your work and your foundation. And thank you so much. This has gone on a little bit over time, but I'd love to ask you one last question before we wrap up. And this is something I used to ask more interviewers. Maybe my first 20 or so, I asked this question, but if you could go back and give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Keep on doing what you were doing. Because
you'll find it. Yeah, you'll find it.
Frankly, I believe that what I'm doing now is a direct consequence of what I did when I was 20, what I did when I was 11, when I did it when I was 35, and so on. Right? In other words, we have a there is a series of steps that we go through that if I didn't go through one of those, I wouldn't be here, interviewing with you, and I would not have a theory of consciousness. So, of course, I don't remember having done anything wrong when I was 20. So
yeah, sure.
I don't do that one, but basically, in fact, I learn more by mistakes than I learn from my successes. So why would I not want to make that mistake that, woke me up to something that otherwise I would not have learned? So.
That's great. Well, thank you. That was a wonderful answer. And I urge the audience to pick up your book, Irreducible. It goes into so much detail and so much technical stuff that we didn't have time for today. But I'll link the book in the description for people who want to learn more. And also some of your lectures that I really loved that you did. Like you've done some stuff with the Essential Foundation. That's been amazing. Yeah. And also you did a presentation about 10 years ago at the Nature of Consciousness conference that was really eye-opening and great. So I'll link those in the description for people who want to dive deeper into your theory.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Very good. Good to meet you. Good to know you.
And thank you, Federico. Yeah, this was a wonderful conversation. I got so much out of this. I hope the audience really loves it as well. And I thank you so much. I'll be definitely keeping a close eye on your work in the future too.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.